Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Law Tech Talk hosted by the Law and Technology Center of the University of Hong Kong. I'm the chair of this talk, Felix Chen, from the Law and Technology Center. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Yueh-Hsuan Weng. Dr. Weng is an assistant professor at the Frontier Research Institute for Interdisciplinary Sciences, Tohoku University in Japan. He is also a fellow in technology law at the Stanford Law School. He received his PhD in law from Peking University and his master degree in computer science from National Jiao Tong University, Taiwan. Dr. Weng is interested in the interface between artificial intelligence and law, including social robotics and legal informatics. Without further ado, let us invite Dr. Weng to deliver his talk on data governance for social robots, how to design the informed consent in HRI from a regulatory perspective. So, Dr. Weng, feel free to start when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you for Professor Chen's kind introduction. Let me share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, clearly, yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I feel very honored to join this Law Tech Talk. Actually, I feel surprised that there are so many people registered for this talk. And let me remember that my first time to give the talk of the robot law and the ethics, it was in a conference in 2009 at IEEE ICRAS, which is the world leading robotics conferences. However, at that time, in that workshop, there were only 9 people attend, and among them, 5 people are speakers. So actually, there are totally 4 audiences joined this workshop. And the title is the Data Governance for Social Robots, but I made some slightly adjustments about the subtitle. So in this talk, I will more focus on the aspects about designing the HRI from a regulatory perspective. But before we discuss about the governance, and we should talk about what is social robots. Social robots have the strong relations with the AI, because with the advancement of intelligence, robots will be intensified with their capabilities. Firstly, from the functionality, then the mobility, and finally, it's about the sociability. And the sociability is not only asks robots that should understand humans' emotion or humans' body behavior, but on the other hand, robots should based on this kind of understanding to perform some kind of social intelligence to respond to people's demands. So you may take this photo as an example, and for the robots to serve you with the digits, if we expect the robots to perform the social intelligence, it should not only calculate the shortcut distance from the kitchen to the customer table, but during this the past planning, the robot should also be aware of how to keep the proper and the social distances between the people around is the past. So in this case, and for robots to be able to perform their sociability is near a higher level of AI. And the social robots, it have the wide potential, especially in the field of the healthcare. According to estimation from the Cabinet Office in Japan, and it's about 28.4% of the Japanese population, they are above the 65 years old. So in other words, Japan is a kind of a super aging society. And for 2035, there is also a kind of a prediction there will be a shortage for the healthcare workers in Japan, about 800,000 people. So in this case, the Japanese government, they are thinking about how can they use social robots and to provide the assistive support to elderly and patients. And according to policy guidelines made by two ministries in Japanese government, the plans and the social robots in the healthcare for the 6 different kind of strategic applications. And in this case, we can also see it for social robots, it have a strong and demand and for the market in the healthcare. And social robots and their goal is to coexist with humans, and they should provide a service and to have the close social interaction with the humans. So in this case, the social robot is a kind of the member in the human society, and they also need to obey norms and the legal rules in the human society. And you can see this is a photo that I took in the Tsukuba city, and they were conducting a kind of experiment and to ask and how can a robot to understand the traffic signals and to decide when to cross the roads. And now in the Japanese cities, there are about 7 different kind of special zones that allows robotic manufacturers, they can test and their advanced robots and outside. And it's also included how this kind of robots can be aligned with the legal and ethical expectations. Social robots, and one of the strong application is about the design and for the use of as the humanoid and human-like or androids. But this kind of anthropomorphic robots, it also have the stronger AOC concerns in terms of their design and the use. So this is one robot and developed by my colleagues, Gabriele Tovato. He just received the interviews from the BBC about this robot last year. And for this kind of robot, it's for the applications in the religious activities. And these robots can be companions and to pray and with the elderly together. But one AOC concerns and happens for this robot is that to children or some people with the low technology literacy, sometimes they might have the misunderstandings to see if they are the preyed to the robots, but not preyed with the robots. So in this case, this will be kind of ethical issues we should be aware of when we use the humanoid robots. And for today's talk, and one key word is HRI, human robot interaction. So why it is important? Because when robots could be sociable, so we cannot only consider the robot sociability problems based on the design of the robots or what kind of materials we should use for the robots, but we should also consider a lot of the human factors. And in this case, the human-robot interaction, it could be the important tool for we to understand what are the key concerns of the robot sociability problems from the human side. If so, regulators, they will be able to implement the social system design to cover this kind of the concerns from the robot sociability problems. So in this case, HRI is have the close ties with the governance. And the research questions in this talk is what are challenges in designing the HRI from a regulatory perspective? And also issues and the challenges covered are: first, shall we consider law as the ideal regulatory tool in the governance of social robots? And second, how to use the AI ethics standards as alternative regulatory tool in the governance for social robots? And third, does embodiment and cause any differences in people's perception of informed consent information when they use the social robots? And fourth, and how informed consent in HRI can be complied with the current legal regulations such as GDPR. But let's start from to take a look for the pyramid of the intelligence. So in the last centuries, the most of the robotic systems, they only have the action intelligence. And action intelligence, the robots, they can only follow and if and the land routes that's assigned by the human programmers. But with the advancement of the machine learning, and they become kind of new level autonomous intelligence machines. So in this case, the robots, they will be able to perform the open textured behaviors. So what is open texture? Open texture here means that for programmers, they can predict all the possible actions that these robots can take, but they are not able to predict what kind of the routes and the autonomous intelligence robots will choose, because this kind of decision will be made in real time when the autonomous intelligence robots interact with the real environment. So we call this kind of behavior as the open texture. And also open texture behavior, they are less predictable compared to the action intelligence robots. And this kind of lowered and predictability will also bring some kind of legal and ethical risks that we should be concerned. And for the next level, it is something that science fiction and Hollywood movies they mentioned. Is someday, and with the development of the AI, they might pass the boundary of the singularity and it becomes the next level, human level intelligence machines. And at this time, the robots will not only perform the open texture behavior, but they also have the thought or the self-awareness. If that day comes, according to Oxford Professor Nick Bostrom, he predicts that it's very likely that within the short time and such kind of human level intelligence robots, they might change into the next level as the super intelligence and machines. So this is the basic introduction about how intelligence might develop. And this kind of understanding is also important to regulators because based on this kind of pyramid, we will be able to understand what are the challenges we are facing. I think the current challenges that we should be aware of is called the Robot Law 1.0. It's about how can we address the legal regulations and the policy guidelines for autonomous intelligence robots. But one critical issue towards this kind of AI governance is about the pacing problems. So a pacing problem, as the digital technologies tend to develop in higher speed and faster than the regulation or social structures governing land, it will cause a gap between technology and the regulation. In other words, and the development speed of the AI and emerging technologies might beyond the experiences and the knowledge of the regulators. But it not only happens now, but also happens in the 19th century. But of course, in the 19th century, the most advanced technology product is not AI, but it's a kind of a steam engine powered vehicles. And in order to solve the safety regulations, the UK government, they made the Locomotive Act in 1865. And probably from the regulations, you can see where the problem is. Of course, this kind of regulations, they can ensure the safety for use this kind of steam engine powered vehicles, but it's kind of over-regulated regulations. For example, they ask 3 persons that should present for the operation of these vehicles. And except to the driver, there's also the other 2 additional persons that they should wave the red flags and during in front of the vehicles. And it will add too much the cost and for these products, and let it become less competitive in the market. And now let's take a back to see the issues about the challenges of the robot law 1.0. So I think there are three critical challenges that we are facing regarding the robot law 1.0. The first is like we should address the future-proof law for the new safety. And the second challenge is like we should consider to make future-proof legal regulations to ensure some kind of gap that happens regarding the ethics and the morality of using the Android or the human-like robots. And the third challenge is like we will need to address a policy and to help regulators to solve the legal conflicts that happens in between the advanced and AI technologies and the current existing legal regulations, such as the GDPR or the criminal law or civil law. Regarding the first challenge, why new safety is an important issue. Of course, and we already have the sound safety regulations for regulate robots in the last century. But as you can see, this kind of regulation is very simple. They only ask the factory owners to set up the emergency button and to erect the cages to separate between the humans and the machines. Because in the past, industrial robots, they don't interact with humans. So this kind of safety regulation sounds okay. But toward the future, social robots, they should serve people. They should come close to people. It is not possible for us to apply the safety regulation based on the policy of the human-robot separation and into the robots that is serve the human and with the goal for human and robot coexistence. And the second challenge is like we will need to consider and to make a kind of a new legal regulations to ensure remove some kind of hazard happened from the morality of the using Android or the human like robots, because this the use of this kind of robots is under kind of regulatory gray zones, and sometimes for the manufacturers the use of the Androids, it might infringe the social identity of the real person. And this is an example of the robots. It's called Abebot, and it's a Android that's created by a Chinese robotics company, and it's based on the appearance of the former Japanese Prime Minister Abe Shinzo. And so they created this kind of Abebot, and they use it to apologize to Chinese people, but without the consent and authorization from the Mr. Abe. And also it will arouse strong and ethical considerations. But at this moment, we do not have the legal regulation which can solve this kind of regulatory gaps. And here we can also take a look to see the new EU machinery regulation proposal, and that's published in last year. And you can see it at the bottom of the proposals. They also mentioned that for the new the EU machinery regulations, one point is like it should consider the human-machine coexistence and also human-machine interactions. And it just verified what I mentioned in my previous articles in the 2018 about the challenges of the new safety. And the other part of the new and the machinery regulation proposal, it mentions that the machinery products and with the fully or the partially evolving the behavior or the logic that is designed to operate with the varying levels of autonomy should be adapted to respond to people adequately and appropriately, and to communicate its planned actions to operators in a comprehensible manner. So in other words, and the future robot design should also provide some kind of functions to note the manner and to be polite with the humans. And it also corresponds to the challenge regarding the legal regulations for the hazards happens regarding the morality. But I think towards these kind of challenges, if we think about the pacing problem, we will know it's very difficult, because among the three challenges, the two challenges is about how to develop the future-proof the law. But currently, we don't have this kind of law. In this case, it might be very difficult for regulators to properly solve this kind of AI governance regarding the use of the social robots. And here, my approach is that to consider soft law. And we might borrow some lessons from the Internet governance. If we refers to Lawrence Lassik's his framework on Internet governance, we will see, except to hard law, there are also other forces that it might be used as a tool and for the governance. They are the markets, norms, and architecture. And if we repress it into the HRI governance, and we might consider the other and the powers, and to put the focus about how to use the soft law and for the HRI governance. And here, my definition of the soft law is a kind of ethical standards and for the AI and the system developers. So it's about issue about how to consider standardization and for the HRI governance. But here I should specify some word in HRI governance, AI governance, because traditionally many people they talk about AI governance, but actually they are talking about the governance for machine learning or the ML governance, because they are talking about how can we ensure the algorithmic decision making should be fair, accountable, or transparent. But if we consider the case of the social robots, there are other issues that the current ML governance they are not covered. For example, for social robots, its embodiment might be performed some kind of hazards of the deception to elderly people or the disability people. And for robots, their autonomous behavior might bring some kind of physical injury to people who come too close to the robots. And these are some issues under the HRI governance, but they are not yet be covered under the ML governance. So I think it's important for us to specify the difference between ML and HRI governance. And if we use the ethical standards and as the tools and for the HRI governance, it's important to consider how to use the ethical standards and to realize the responsible research and innovation. In other words, these kind of ethical standards can be guidelines and to help engineers to reduce the risks during the design stages. Here we can see there are two different strategies and regarding the HRI governance. The strategy one is that we don't intervene and the design and the development of the AI systems until the products has been developed, and then we classify the risks of the different levels, and based on the different levels AI products, we assign the obligations to land. So this is kind of traditional lawyers thinking. It's also part of content that appeared in the EU's AI Act. Or the other way of thinking is like we should consider how can we actively reduce and simplify the problems by reduce the risks and during the development stages of the AI systems. It's like the BS 8611. It's a kind of ethical guidelines and to let the engineers can do the ethical assessments and to reduce the risks before the product has been made. But for standards, I think to most people, their understanding is the technical standards in the business areas. And usually there are two kinds of standards. First is the de facto standards. It's like a Windows OS. It's a kind of standard, and based on the products has the higher market share. Or the other is the de jure standards. It's a standard that's made by the top-down agencies like ISO or the IEEE. But for the technical standards and in the field of regulations, there are two different kind of applications. The first is like it can be the extension of the law in the legal enforcement. So like traffic enforcement, it's important to use the standards for the traffic signs because it can improve the efficiency for the policemen to do the traffic enforcement. And the other way is like let it become the alternative approach of the hard law. So in this case, the technical standards in regulation, it can be tools to enable the AI developers to create the system in a more responsible way. And also we will need an ethical standards as a compass to guide engineers, and ethical standards can be software laws for engineers to realize the self-regulation. And I am a member and to help the IEEE to draft the AI ethical standards. But for IEEE, there are two kinds of ethical standards. The first is the EAD, ethically aligned design. For this standard is used for the education and the public engagement purposes. But for the HRI governance, I am talking about the other type of the AI ethics standards. So it's the standards for industrial use, or the IEEE 7000 series. And since last year, I have been serving as the group chair of the IEEE Standards Association, and to help them and to draft a new standard. It's based on the ethical considerations of the cognitive AI robots for enhancing human efficacy. So if we used the ethical standards and for the HRI governance, so one very possible way is like these standards can be a kind of a guideline to help engineers to do the legal and the ethical assessments and to remove the risks during the design stages. And there are two different kinds of ways. First is called ethically aligned design, and the other is called social system design. And in today's talk, I will focus on the later approach as a social system design by showing you a kind of assessment. It's called a legal validation. Data governance is important for social robots because, as I mentioned, and for robots to perform the higher level social intelligence with human, it's needed to acquire a huge amount of the personal sensitive data. But for data governance, it's not only considered data protection, it's also important to consider its a business value. So in other words, it should keep the balance between the protection and the business applications. In this case, the data and the protection laws can be a data policy to guide the stakeholders which kind of actions they should take. And in this talk, I will focus on informed consent. Informed consent, it means that the data subjects knows the identity and how the data possession activities are going to be conducted and what is the purposes for this possession. And of course, they have the right to withdraw the consent anytime, and the consent should be given in a planned way. But why informed consent, it becomes a new problem in the governance for social robots. So you can see this robot Lavo is a kind of a cheap and affordable social robot in Japan. And this robot it provides the autonomous function, so you don't need to control it. But in order to support its autonomous function, so on the top of its head, there's a kind of a strong sensor. It can collect personal data and to support the robot's sociable interaction. So here is the problem. For the manufacturers of Lavoto, they designed a privacy mode. And if you turn on it, and they can ensure that the robot will not record your personal data. But in this case, can we regard it as kind of a cookies, something like a cookies consent when which you use every day when you browse your website? I think there are several questions whether this kind of interface design can be satisfied with the data protection regulations or not. But for this talk, I will go through a further question is about whether for the use of the social robots, its embodiment will cause some kind of regulatory gap with the current data protection law or not. And this is why we will need to consider use as ethical guidelines as a soft law and to enable the legal assessment called legal validation, and to help engineers that they can specify whether some kind of the legal gaps exist or not. And for this kind of legal assessment, legal validations, I designed 3 different tests to do the evaluation and use a real robot. It's called NOT. It's a kind of humanoid robot. And also, in order to simulate the informed consent scenarios, I also use a mini projector to show the consent text, and while the robots provide the voice instructions. And for this kind of test, I invite 32 participants from the Tohoku University. The first test is called deception. And for this test, we want to test and whether the robot's embodiment, body gestures will mislead the users or not. So while the robots provide the voice instructions, if you agreed and please grab my right hand, but actually, and we let the robots to write is the left hand. So it becomes a kind of confusing scenario to the users. And we want to test whether in this case, and the users, they will choose and to follow the robot's voice instruction, or it's the physical and gesture. But based on this test, we found that all the 32 participants and to these confusing scenarios, they all choose to grab the left hand of the robot. So in other words, embodiment, it have a stronger impact and to the users comparing to the voice instruction. And for the second test, we want to test the proximity with the bystander. Because when you give your consent and under the use of the laptop, usually the angle and the distance with the websites are fixed. But to the case of the robots, when the robots give the consent to the user, so in the real environment, so the users can have the different distances or different angles with the robots. And also one unwanted situation is like suppose a bystander and appears, and it might intervene the robots and cause the robots misunderstood if the consent was given from the bystanders. So based on this test, and we set up the robots when it detects the consent has been given, the robots will take the photo. And based on the photo, we can see at the time robots think the consent has been given, what is the focus of the robot? Is it the focus from the user or the bystanders? And we found that the results are very tricky because there are several different situations happens. For example, if the robot's the focus includes both user and the bystander, it's okay, but I think it's a kind of a gray zone of informed consent. Or the case like the robot only focus on the part of the user, it's a little bit tricky because for this test, the user didn't give the consent. Actually, the consent has been given by the bystander, but the robot misunderstood that if it has been given from the user. And also, we found that one interesting situation is like sometimes if the robots cannot detect the user if the user is too tall. And the third test is about the proximity and safety. So for this test, we want to validate, except to the data protection law, there are several different safety and legal regulations exist in the scenarios of the human-robot interaction. If the conflict of these regulations happens, what should we do? So we want to test, because for the ISO 13482 safety regulations, they have a kind of regulation. It's like there should be 3 different virtual safety zones between humans and the robots. For example, if the humans is stand in the zone 3, which is the longest distance with the robot can perform its tasks in a normal way. But if the user come closer into the second zone, and the robot should reduce the half of its power and speed for the safety reason. But if the user entering into the first zone, which is very close to the robot have to be shut down regardless of what task robot is performing. And this kind of safety regulation might have the potential conflict with the GDPR, because according to GDPR, it defines the informed consent should be freely given. But if we consider the case of the ISO safety regulation, if the robots and humans have the very close distances, the robot will be shut down, and it will not be able to receive the informed consent from the user. And also, user cannot be freely given the consent due to this kind of restriction from the physical environment. So in this case, we invite the users to have this kind of test and to specify what kind of a distance might be most proper distance for given the informed consent without the conflict with the safety regulations. And I think due to the limited time, and I would like to skip the part of discussions and entering the part of the conclusions. So the conclusion for this talk is like with the progress of the developments in AI robots, we will face the pacing problems and when deal with the governance of its uses. And AI ethical standards will be efficient tools for developers to realize their responsible robot development. But however, there is a need to further investigate the ethical designs for its implementations. And informed consent will become a key issue on the privacy and the data protection. And through the analysis of the legal assessments called legal validation, and it can help engineers to identify the ways to implement informed consent in human and robot interactions. And not only to GDPR, but also to the new and the EU's AI Act, it also asks that there's the applications and for the AI product developers to provide some kind of transparent instructions for the users. But how transparent is the can call transparent? I think it's a kind of design issue, because from the legal terminologies, we cannot only concretely specify what is called transparent instruction. And in this case, I think towards the future AI governance, it's also important for us to consider the study between the AI's law and the designs when we considered the governance of the social robots. So this is my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Wang, for the excellent presentation. Now we will have a time of Q&A. I would like to invite the participants to type your questions using the Q&A box. So, and then Dr. Wang will read your questions and respond to your questions one by one. So feel free to type your questions now. As I can see from the screen, there are questions already being submitted by the participants. Okay, so I will leave it to Dr. Wang to respond to your questions one by one.
Okay, thank you for Dr. Chen. Let's see, the first question is about the AI ethical standards. Yes, I think my conclusion is like due to the pacing problem, I think at the initial stage, AI ethical standards might be better tools compared to the laws. But according to the development of the AI into the later stages, if we have the more sufficient and comprehensive legal regulations, and the demand for the AI ethical standards might be less compared to the initial stages. So I think of AI ethical standards, it might be a kind of efficient tools during the transition period of the AI development. And also for the AI ethical standards, yes, I think it is a good question. I think regarding how to develop the AI ethical standard, of course, yeah, it's kind also a part of the democratic process, because as I mentioned, now I am serving as a study group chair, and for the IEEE Standards Associations, and for these kind of associations, the oath of the process for draft these kind of standards should be open and transparent. And take my group as an example. Every month, and we will have the meeting, and this meeting is open to anyone. So if someone want to join, the chairs have no right to reject it. And also for the important stages that we will also be part of the voting. So we can, based on the people's consensus, to decide what kind of content we should assign into these kind of ethical standards or not. So in this case, I think the productions of the ethical standards is a kind of ways of based on the democratic process. And regarding the second question from the teen laws, in the test 2, and can the problems be technically solved by using and sonar lidar combined by image analysis simultaneously and analyze the data with respect to tides? Actually, for the test 2 and the robots is we just use some kind of a default and functions that provided by the SoftBank robotics. So because the purpose is like we want to test whether the robots can autonomously and notice whether the focus of the concern given is from the user or bystanders. So in this case, I am not sure about whether it can be given or not, because I am not familiar with the default setting from the SoftBank robotics. Okay, and welcome to let me know if you have further questions. Okay, the third question, may I ask if any social robots does something wrong, like the breach of laws? Who should we ask for liability? The user or the producer of the robot? Yeah, I think this is a good question. Because to social robots, I think one well discussed question is like what kind of legal status we should assign to this robot, and how should we decide the liability between different stakeholders of the social robots. So maybe from the beginnings of my introduction of the social robot, you have seen that there's a photo about the religious robots. Actually, from these robots, it also causes some kind of misunderstandings to people. And this kind of misunderstanding is a kind of inconsistency about its legal status. Because according to the current legal regulations, the legal status of the robot is just a property, right? If you damage it or broke it, and we can just follow the way like using the tort law. But some people, they might think these robots is because they less social intelligence and sociability might let people project their emotions on these robots. So some people, they might think it's unfair. You know, if we decide we consider the liability is just based on the traditional approach as the property, we should also consider, or maybe to follow the example like the animal protection and apply it into social robots. But yeah, but I think this is some issues under the debate. But currently, regarding the liability distributions, I think if something happens about the robots, the most of the responsibility should be afforded by its the designer and the manufacturers. And of course, the robot itself cannot be liable. And for Ryan, you have the question: do you feel weird or developed globally standardized, announced and lost about HRI, or will the layers should there be significant variation across the jurisdictions? I think it's very important for us to consider and to develop the standardized norms and the laws about HRI, because as I mentioned, and regarding the AI governance, currently most of the people, they only focus about the governance on the machine learning, and there's almost no standards and laws specifically for HRI. I think only now for IEEE, there's only one ethical standard. They are it's a kind of ontological standards for intelligent robots, and it's kind of asymmetry between the software, the products, and the robots. So in this case, it's important and to have a kind of thinking to address the kind of international and the standards and the regulations for the HRIs. And also the next question: how can we ensure that the AI ethical standards are perfectly fit in the laws, and we have the right notes, and the ethical standards can be executed in the future? I think the purpose for using AI ethical standards is a kind of replacement of the laws, and but which is does not mean that we don't need laws. So in this case, we can consider maybe a hybrid way. It's like we both applied the hard law and the soft law into the governance of the social robots, but according to the different stages of the AI development, we can consider to adjust the percentage between using the ethical standards and the hard laws. For Anne, your question is that you have been discussing HRI. Would you say there are areas that we should prohibit using robots, lava robots, and prisoner guard robots? And should we prohibit using robots or to replace the human beings in certain types or jobs? And what should our considerations be? Yes, it's a kind of a good question. And actually, as I introduced and to social robots, now the one applications which have the strong ethical and legal consideration is about anthropomorphic and expressive robots. And for example, these robots can be used as sex dolls. And in this case, there could be a concern that whether we should prohibit it or not. And but on the other hand, if we prohibit these kind of applications, some kind of robotics manufacturers, they might protest to it because they said it might reduce their chance for the business innovations. So currently, compromised way is like we can develop some kind of soft law and use this kind of soft law, this kind of guideline, and to guide the use of the social robots. And one example that happened in Japan is about the use of the androids, and it's based on creating the a great man in the history. Because for the manufacturers, they might claim that if I want to design the androids based on the appearance of a real person, and it is my freedom. But on the other hand, one concern is like for designing this kind of androids, it might infringe the social identity of the this kind of historical great man, or sometimes it might infringe the personality rights of its family. So in this case, under a symposium in 2018 by the Japanese lawyers and the robotics experts, they have the consensus that we should consider and using a soft law as kind of a guidance to use and this kind of social robots, but not to prohibit them. And I remember there are 4 different principles for the guideline to create and use the social robots, and based on the appearance of the historical great man. So the first principle is like regarding the creations, and it should get the consent and authorization from their families. And the second principle is about the use of the social robots. The second principle is like anyone have the freedom to use it, but it should not with the infringement of the social identity of this kind of historical great men. And also, if you use this kind of android and to give a speech in the public, and you should provide the notices to let people know this is not a real person, this is an android, because it will avoid some kind of confusion of the understanding of the history. And the third principle is about the dignity of the social robots. Because of social robots are currently under our legal and framework, it is just a property. But we should consider to provide them some kind of a respect and a dignity when we have to interact with this kind of android. And the last principle is actually the prepared for the future. It's called a reservation of the rights. For example, for this kind of android, when it's used in the public event, there could be some kind of a copyright or neighboring rights exist. But because at this stage, robots, they are not qualified to be the owner of these rights. So until in the future, robots will have a kind of personhood, this kind of special legal status. The robots will be able to receive this kind of copyright and neighboring rights. So this is my answers.
So thank you, Dr. Wang, for the very insightful responses to the questions raised by the audience. It is about 2 o'clock. So on behalf of the Law and Technology Center of the University of Hong Kong, we would like to thank you once again for your excellent talk and your analysis. And of course, the Law and Technology Center looks forward to future collaboration with you, Dr. Wang, in these areas concerning artificial intelligence, social robotics, and legal informatics. So once again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the participants for your participation in this talk. So look forward to seeing you again in the next Law Tech Talk. Thank you very much.